Hi, and welcome to our favorites of 2024 for adult books. We're not trying to create the definitive list of the best books. These are just some books that we loved this year, and we hope you will also. My name's Allison, and I'm joined here today by some of my fellow librarians, Rachel, Ivy, and Julia. And we're going to get started with some nonfiction books. First up is Dogland. Passion, Glory, and Lots of Slobber at the Westminster Dog Show by Tommy Tomlinson. If you like nonfiction and really appreciate an author that does in-depth research, but you'd sometimes like a little bit lighter topic for your nonfiction, this is the choice for you. There's lots of information about Westminster Dog Show in particular, but also about dogs in general, how purebred breeds came to be developed, our relationship with dogs. It's everything dogs. So it's a must for dog lovers, and it's also fabulous on audio.
The authors of The Unclaimed follow four individuals whose bodies were unclaimed after their deaths in Los Angeles, as well as their communities and people working in the death industry who interacted with their stories. It's a thoughtful work on how society and law define community, and it left me ruminating on how the definition of family, money, and bureaucracy can leave even people who had close connections at the time of their deaths without someone to decide what happens to their remains. I was particularly moved by the life stories of the four people and the work of people in jobs such as grave digging who care for those society has failed.
One sounds super interesting, Ivy.
And it does.
So There's Always This Year by Hanif Abdurraqib is part essays, part memoir about basketball, LeBron James, and Ohio. I'm not a sports fan, and I'm from Michigan, so I did not grow up loving Ohio, but I've read some of Abdurraqib's other writings and heard enough glowing reviews about this title that I decided to give it a shot, basketball pun intended. Even though there is a hoop on the cover, this book is really about what it's like to be from a place, what it's like to feel at home, wanting to leave that place, and what it feels like to come back. Abdurraqib's writing is stunning, so I wanted to let it speak for itself, and I'll leave you with a quote that I think captures the heart of this book. And of course, I'm not immune to the desire for exits. I've said already that I once believed my salvation would be found in another place, and so I get it. But it comes down, oh my goodness, what it comes down to is that some of us would rather live a long life of what some others might consider a failure, but do it in a place that will catch you every time. I will take that over a triumph in a city that doesn't touch me back.
That's really beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I stumbled a little bit.
That's okay. So now we're going to move to some fiction. So Mrs. Quinn's Rise to Fame was one of the first books I read this year, but it has just stayed with me. Mrs. Quinn is an older English woman who has always loved to bake, and she decides to apply for what is like a fictional version of the Great British Bake Off. But they get thousands of applicants. She doesn't think she'll ever hear back, so she doesn't tell her husband or her family. But then she starts getting these mysterious phone calls and has to go off for an appointment in London, which is really an interview, an audition for the show. Her husband and family thinks she has some kind of major medical issue that she's covering up. And she's also baking like obscene amounts of food. And they think she's just trying to get it all in. What if, obviously she has to tell her family because she gets on the show and they're going to come do the home interviews and all. But throughout this book, we're also learning that Mrs. Quinn has a pretty serious secret from her past that she never told her husband and is now pondering. Does she tell him after 50 years and risk her marriage, or is not telling him also a risk? This book is the perfect example of uplit fiction, has some serious issues, but will always leave you with some humor and an uplifting story. And it's sure to keep you smiling and probably also doing a lot of baking.
I love that. I love seeing the ones that have stayed our favorites, Allison, from our New Year, New Books. So this is one of mine, Family by Laurie Frankel. This was an amazing book that dives into the nuance of what families can look like in all their various forms, and it follows the story of India, who gets pregnant at 16 and decides that placing her baby up for adoption is the best choice, a win-win for everyone. And Indio goes on to become a famous actress, starring in a movie that discusses adoption, only to end up in hot water when she critiques her own movie and its portrayal of the adoption process. So this book analyzes what happens when the world wants a clear narrative or stance, but the clear answer isn't the most honest one. And it shows how the life of one person connects to the lives of so many others and changes everyone in the process. I loved the quirky characters and the dialogue of this book. It kept you guessing. There were some fun surprises along the way. And the story itself is just beautiful, heartfelt, and captures the messiness and joy of family, and how the different ways that they can come into being, which I just absolutely loved. I also love that the author shared in a note at the end that it's not just representation that matters, but positive representation. And I feel like this book really captured that, and it was such a pleasure to read. So I enjoyed this one.
Okay, well, speaking of messy families, this is The Wedding People by Alison Esbeck. This has been probably one of the biggest breakout hits of the year from a really lesser-known author, and has turned into a big bestseller. Now, I have to give a trigger warning that the beginning of this book especially deals with thoughts of suicide. But there's a counter warning, which is the book is really a celebration of life and of overcoming mental illness. Phoebe has reserved a room at a lavish hotel overlooking the ocean in Newport, Rhode Island, where she plans on ending her life. What she doesn't know is that the whole rest of the hotel has been booked for one extremely lavish 6-day wedding extravaganza. Phoebe ends up interacting with the people in the wedding and realizes she wants to know what happened. She wants to know how these crazy family members are going to interact and see things. So that is what Ollie opens her eyes to. She wants to know what comes next in life, and she wants to keep going. The characters are amazing, although not always amazingly good people. They're just amazing. And as readers, we get to be on the sidelines for this wedding and on Phoebe's new lease on life. So The Wedding People was just a surprise for me and for so many readers this year. All right, go on. Okay.
Yeah, that was a fun book. It definitely starts dark, but I agree with Allison. Hang in there because the characters are lovely and totally say what you sometimes are thinking in your own head. So they're fun. This is The Lion Women of Tehran, and it's from the author of The Stationery Shop. This is her newer historical fiction read, and it's the heartfelt tale of friendship, deceit, and redemption set against the backdrop of Tehran, Iran, over the span of 3 decades. So when Ellie's father dies suddenly in 1950s Tehran, she and her mother must move to a small town that Ellie's mother continually despairs is beneath her social class. Ellie longs for a friend to meet in her loneliness, only to find the vivacious and very chaotic Oma, who immediately bonds with Ellie as the pair aspire to set the world on fire as lion women and make a difference. When Ellie and her mother's fortunes change and they move, Ellie begins to forget her sweet friend Oma until she suddenly reappears in her world years later and will drastically change both of their lives. So as Iran's political turmoil escalates, a single betrayal will shake the foundations Ellie and Oma have built. So I loved this story. It was a fabulous coming of age narrative. It was an homage to friendship and a very well-written historical fiction read centering on Iran. It has so much history and so much heart to it, and it really shows the power of relationships, as well as the power in letting those relationships shape and grow us into stronger versions of ourselves. I highly recommend this one. It was definitely a favorite.
Okay, this is There Are Rivers in the Sky by Elif Shafak. Okay, I'll be honest, this was the most devastating book I read this year, but also one of the most impactful. My neighbors might be reporting that I was just wandering the neighborhood crying and listening to the audiobook, but it follows 3 characters in 3 different times, and all set against the backdrop of the Thames River in England and the Tigris River in Iraq and Syria. This book will have you researching the Yazidi people, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the importance of the Tigris-Euphrates in human civilization, among other topics. I can't even begin to explain the complex story of the interaction between these characters from different eras. But what you do know is that these stories are beautifully interwoven through one drop of water that travels in those rivers in the sky. This book is well worth the tears you might shed. And now, speaking of, and we're still with the crying books. We're still, sorry, we're going to lighten things up in a minute. But this is The Warm Hands of Ghosts by Katherine Arden. Arden is best known for her books, They Said the Bear and the Nightingale, based on Russian mythology. But now she has moved into, with this book, to historical fiction with a touch of paranormal. I said the previous book was my most devastating read. This was a real close second. Sorry. It follows a Canadian brother and sister who are both serving in World War I. The sister has returned to Europe. She finished her tour of duty as a nurse, but she returns when her brother is declared missing and searching for him. It's not a ghost story, despite the title. The ghost is a sort of presence or character in the book and really represents the evil, fear, trauma, and insanity of war. I love that this book, even though it's set more than 100 years ago, there's a lot about the inclusion of women in war, there's LGBTQ representation, and there's an acknowledgement of PTSD even before it was named that. Again, get out your tissues and immerse yourself in this world. Now we're going to, well, I don't know if we're lightening things up. We're just changing. Yes, this is another one. Both Julie and I have been trying to get people to read this book all year. So do it.
Good. Okay. So kind of veering into more mystery thriller-esque is The Heiress by Rachel Hawkins. So this is a fantastic mystery that I thoroughly enjoyed. It follows the story of Ruby McTavish, a notorious heiress of a North Carolina estate. And so she was born into wealth and luxury, but went missing as a young girl, only to be miraculously found in the arms of a family convinced she was one of their own. She is then reunited with her wealthy blood relatives in North Carolina and goes on to marry 4 different men over her life, each one dying mysteriously from accidents and illnesses. Considered incredibly unlucky in love, Ruby later adopts a son, who she then leaves her entire estate to when she dies. So this story picks up as the story of her son Camden returning, along with his wife, to the home he ran away from to face family members he hates and a fortune he resents. So I loved this mystery. It just had so many fun elements to it. It was chock full of family drama, death, and twisted secrets. The mystery really smartly unravels and the misdeeds and misfortunes of this famous family. And I loved the sense of intrigue and suspense throughout it. I definitely highly recommend this one. It was a fun one.
Okay, we're going to let other people talk now, Julia.
I don't know if this one gets any lighter, but the cover is at least more colorful. But Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle is a queer horror about queer horror. The term bury your gaze is a trope often used in media to describe a phenomenon where queer characters historically have been more likely to be killed off in stories rather than being allowed to have a happy ending. In this book, we follow Misha, a horror screenwriter who has finally found some mainstream success with a TV show. But his producer informs him that the networks wants him to kill off one of the main queer characters of his show to please the algorithm. When Misha fights back against the network, he starts being haunted by the monsters he's created in his past on-screen works. Is he going crazy, or is there something else at play? This book will definitely not be for everybody. There is some very graphic violence and some horrific monsters, but if those are not deal breakers for you, I would definitely recommend giving this book a shot.
Okay, so we have one science fiction book for you, and it is Service Model by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is a robot murder mystery. If you're a fan of Murderbot, this might be for you. In this world, there are robots doing most of the tasks for humans, and our main character robot is a valet, and he murders his owner. But the police show up and say, that's not possible. Robots can't do that. It wasn't on your task list for today. You were physically incapable. And he was like, but I did. I have blood. It goes on, and it turns out that he is developing feelings, and maybe that's going on in the robot world. It's just, it's funny, it's entertaining, but and I haven't quite finished it because I'm waiting to read it for a book club. I started it, realized one of my book clubs is reading it, so I made myself stop so I will read it in August, and I can't wait because already that first half of it was so fabulous that I think it will be a favorite. Now off to Ivy.
All right. I have long loved the Arthurian legend, and Lev Grossman's interpretation of it in The Bright Sword has earned a place amongst my favorites. Like those classic legends, the stories in this novel are meandering and bittersweet. The story is set in its original medieval time, and there is a strong balance between retaining that setting and introducing modern concepts, including multiculturalism, feminism, and queerness to these beloved characters that we may have met from the T.H. and Le Morte Arthur and all of the classics. This book is long, but I couldn't stop reading it. And the payoff of lives lived the best ways our heroes know how under an imperfect moral system was deeply worth it. I can't stop talking this one up. If you've ever loved any version of the Arthurian legend, definitely grab this one.
Okay.
So I am not a Shakespeare scholar and I've never read Macbeth, but I am a really big fan of Ava Reid. I think that they are masterful at creating the atmosphere of their book. So the setting of this one is misty and mildewy and salty and eerie, and we're following Roskilde on her way to becoming Lady Macbeth. So already we have a notable change from Shakespeare's original version where Lady Macbeth is given a first name. She is the only woman in Macbeth's claustrophobic castle by the sea. She is young and scared, but has the power to compel people as her defense. She immediately begins scheming to gain allies in the castle, which does not always go to plan. There's a decent amount of criticism about the accuracy of the setting in this book, and fans of Shakespeare's original Lady Macbeth do not universally love this interpretation, but I thought Roskilde was a compelling character. She does not always make the bravest or the wisest choices, but she does what she thinks will help her survive. And if you like witchy atmospheric novels, I recommend this one.
I'm just going to jump in here and say another big Lady Macbeth book of this year was All Our Yesterdays by Joel Morris, who is a local Colorado author and a teacher at Cherry Creek High School. And it's the same thing, like a different take on the Lady Macbeth character. And so it would probably be fun to read both and compare.
I'll say I added that one to my list because I do definitely want to look at them both.
I feel like after hearing those adjectives you used to describe this book, I definitely have to pick it up.
Yes.
Macbeth is my favorite tragedy, so I feel like I want to read these and like see how I feel.
Okay. And totally changing
a little bit fun, lighter note.
Yes.
I read some really great rom-coms this year, and one that stood out was called The Rom-Commers by Catherine Senner. And it's another heartfelt, humorous, and contemporary romance from the author. She's written several others that I also loved. This one follows an aspiring screenwriter, Emma, who is given the chance of a lifetime to rewrite a script with the world-famous screenwriter, Charlie Yates. Her romance expertise is called upon because Charlie has epically failed at his attempt to write a romantic script. And so she is being called in to be his romance guru. The only problem is Emma is caretaker for her amazing dad who needs full-time care. And that is until her younger sister steps up and volunteers to help so that Emma can meet one of her screenwriting idols and kickstart her career. What follows is a funny romance with witty banter, great characters, and a deeper conversation about health, family obligations, and how we move forward from grief. So Senner, part of the reason I love her books is it's plenty of romance, plenty of humor, and great banter, like I said, but she also does an amazing job bringing heart and hope to her romances and weaving in those deeper themes that I feel like give a little more oomph and foundation to an otherwise pretty light romance read. I loved this one.
All right, another romance, and this one features some of my favorite genre tropes, including friends to lovers, found family, a road trip, and second chance romance. And amidst the classic gags inherent in a sloppy/organized love story, the author Alison Cochrane addresses how we live and die as queer people, creating space for one another, gatekeeping the blurred lines between platonic and romantic love, and the personal and communal importance of a gay man who was in his prime during the AIDS crisis, living to old age. The road trip does center around the death of one of the major characters, so bear that in mind, but it is ultimately very hopeful.
Keeping the romance train going. Just for the Summer is Abby Jimenez's latest in a series of interconnected romances and rom-coms. I've read all three, and I think that this one's probably the most serious of the three, even though it definitely has its very funny, laugh out loud comedic moments. Emma and Justin connect online after Justin posts about being cursed, which is a curse that Emma shares. Their exes always find their soulmates after they break up with either Emma or Justin. So Emma is a travel nurse and works out to be stationed where Justin lives for her next stop, because if they date, then they should find their soulmates next, right? While their scheme unfolds, both Justin and Emma are dealing with complicated family dynamics and working on their mental health, and Jimenez's ability to balance humor while creating characters with real depth makes her stories really stand out to me. I would recommend reading them in their publication order. So this is the third, but all of the books in the Part of Your World series by Abby Jimenez have been 5-star romances for me.
Yeah, that one definitely has some great deeper conversations in it too. Love that one. Okay, so several of us are going to talk about this one because we all enjoyed it. Emily Henry, who writes so many romantic contemporary romances like Beach Read, Book Lovers, and Happy Place, is back with a funny story that came out this year. And this book follows Daphne after her boyfriend leaves her for his best friend Petra. Daphne is then left heartbroken, and while she plans her next move, she agrees to room with Petra's ex-boyfriend, Miles. I always have to explain that clearly. So the exes end up rooming together. The pair forms an unexpected friendship amidst their shared grief and find that love can be found in the most unlikely of places. So for me, I loved the Opposites Attract romance for its witty dialogue and family and life expectation conversations, as well as how to pick up the pieces of a life and start again. But I'm not alone in my love for this, so I'll pass it off to Rachel and Ivy.
So our main character in this book is also a librarian, so I think that there's definitely some bias coming from this group as to why we all loved it so much. And not only am I a librarian, but I'm also from Michigan, which is the setting of this book, so there's basically no chance I wasn't going to love it. And then especially after reading Hanif Abdurraqib's book recently, reflecting on Funny Story, it was really nice and lovely to see someone writing about my home state with such affection.
It's so true. The setting, she definitely describes well.
Yeah, I loved this book as well. I've loved all of Emily Henry's stuff, but this is probably my favorite. I loved the themes of truly building community, which did not feel secondary to the romance in this one, and allowing others growth as we try our best to grow ourselves. And as a blunt adult services librarian, I really liked the blunt adult services librarian character.
I love that.
So I feel bad. I'm like the holdout here, but I have the audiobook on hold. The peer pressure's getting to me now, so I will be joining in soon.
I'll loan you my copy if you want.
I know how to get it from the library then. So
I love that.
All right. Well, thank you. That is our books. We hope you enjoy some of them. We certainly enjoyed some and got some recommendations from each other. And we'll be back with more book suggestions for you in 2025. Thanks.